Uh, Good morning again. This is Sridhar again. So this is the second session that I'll be delivering on something very important again, preparing to become a PhD guide, roles and responsibilities. Uh, Here, definitely, whatever I'm sharing is all from my personal experience. I have been a PhD guide myself for almost 5 to 6 years. So there are different aspects from when we start to, uh, how we proceed. So I'll be just sharing all of that, how to go about it, and so again I throw out this disclaimer. The practices and approaches will definitely vary from person to person here. When everyone becomes a guide, how do you deal with the students and your projects and everything? So you may use whatever I'm going to present as uh, some stepping stones towards progressing to become a guide. So please exercise your judgment regarding the suitability of this content. So what I'm going to deal with is what is supervision, why the supervision, then the who, what is the role of the supervisor, for whom the researcher's role. That is, we'll focus mostly on the student here. Of course, you can also have researchers like there are institutes and universities where you have research faculty, who are only doing the research. How do you manage this supervision? It's a completely different ball game compared to when you are a student. And then something important which we find out as we progress when things don't work out, for both guide as well as the student. So we are already aware, we should be, that supervisor will be an important partner in a PhD student's research career. I mentioned here only a PhD student, but it could be a master's student as well. Of course, we also have supervisors now for UG students because UG students are doing a lot of projects here. But my focus here will be more on a long-term project. So the focus will be more on the PhD student here. So let's see what is supervision. There are so many definitions of supervision, and they come because you need supervisors in different domains, not just in academics, but you need supervisors in different domains. So as you can see in the picture which I have picked up from this reference below, that there is a paper maker with his apprentice. So you are basically expecting this paper maker to tell this apprentice what to do, how to do, and then when he starts doing this paper making, the you are expecting this supervisor paper maker to tell this apprentice where he is going right, where he is going wrong, and where he can improve upon himself. So we can take all of this into the academia as well and into the research as well, and that is the whole aspect or the job of a supervisor, what is expected. So basically, as a supervisor, I'm going to direct and oversee the work of, uh, let's call it junior, but here we'll talk about postgraduate research student. So I want to see how he's working towards this project, and I certainly need to direct the student because the student has no experience when he joins and has some experience as he progresses. So we cannot do this alone. The supervisor cannot do this alone. So usually in these universities now, we have committees. You want to call them research committee, where you are guided by an internal researcher, an external researcher, and various other people. If you have industry connect, co-PIs, and so on and so forth. So you'll be supported by a lot of experts from different domains of learnings. We don't really always count librarians into that, but library plays a major role. They have so many things for us to read, and so many tools are available. So you will be assisted by librarians. You'll also need IT personals. If you're dealing with a lot of data, like in AI, then you need these people who are managing servers for us. So you need IT personals. Uh, Supervisors themselves have mentors who have guided them. So you will definitely need their support, especially in the initial phase when you're supervising for the very first time. So you also need guidance from the sponsors if there are funding agencies, and then we also have our own career advisors who may not be directly linked with our research domain, but they have been advising us over career. And there are many more as well. So we'll be supported. The whole idea is that the supervisor is not alone. He or she is always going to be supported. So as a general rule, we need to have one main supervisor for every PhD. So as I said, I'll be focusing a lot on PhD. So we need to have at least one major supervisor here. You can also have co-PIs, collaborative, and there are many other aspects which can be, but there has to be one main supervisor. So you're always having that one paper maker for each apprentice. So apprentice cannot be alone. He needs to have a mentor, a guide, and a supervisor. So why do we need this supervision? What why? I think in my experience, it's very important to understand why. Because usually in our mind we have, okay, I've completed a PhD. Mostly in most of the universities, after you complete or you get your provisional degree or your actual degree, you need to wait for a year and then you can start guiding. So our focus is mostly on, okay, I'll wait for this 1 year or some span and then I will start guiding. But we really don't focus on why do I need to supervise? Okay. Of course, there is one thing that you have a project and you'll get your inputs from the student and have the graduates and everything, but there is more to why do we want to supervise. So you're basically building a team here that will work on the same domain, uh, which is key to the success of the PhD student. And you're not just talking about one PhD student here. You're talking about future PhD students as well. And if you have a big team, you'll have master students, you'll have many UG students who will play part in this. So we need to be very clear why we need to supervise. And we cannot supervise on different domains, especially in the early career. It is very important. This is my personal experience. It's very important to direct ourselves to only one domain rather than having our feet in 3 4 different domains and trying to do it. It's just too much. You may be able to complete it, but the quality will not be there. So it's very important to focus only on one domain. Usually, a fresh supervisor will continue what he or she did during his or her doctoral work. And mostly, you always need uh, the support of your guide even after you have completed the doctorate, because you need to understand the other side, that is the side of supervision. Because for 4 5 years or 6 years when you're doing your PhD, you are on the other end, you are the student. But when you go into the supervision, it's very important to understand the other side, which is of supervision. So usually you will see that you're still with your doctoral guide for initial years, and then slowly you become independent. So we need to supervise because you need a high level of interdependence on any doctoral study. Uh, Now you are talking about these days interdisciplinary research, multidisciplinary research. So you can have people, let's say, in computer science working with people in, let's say, mechanical engineering. There's a lot of dependence, interdependence, multi-dependence. So because of that, also you need supervision. Uh, you'll be working on a project, uh, mostly funded projects, even if it is not funded, you're still calling it a project. So you need to obviously successfully complete this project, and you're hoping that this would be a smooth ride for all parties which are involved. So you need supervision there. Uh, you also help the student or the students to you know uh, come into the academic life or integrate themselves into the academic life and career. Mostly the people who are pursuing doctorate will be entering into the academics. Of course, some of them also move into industry, but you want their passage into whatever career they are taking. This should be a smooth one, and therefore that kind of quality is required during their doctoral study. So supervision is required for that. It is very important for the supervisor to have a good grasp of state of the art, because let's see this. When I start my doctoral study, let's say in 2020, for example, and when I complete my doctoral study, let's say in 2025, for example, things have absolutely changed. So when I start my supervision, let's say in 2026, I cannot really be, doing the same things which I did in 2020 or 21 or 22 because things have completely changed. So the whole idea that the supervisor needs to build upon is to have, a good idea of state of the art in the research domain. So your domain can be the same, but just it has progressed a lot. So I cannot just tweak or make minor changes into my own doctoral study and then have the same kind of study being done by my PhD student. So that's not the way to do it. So I need to be updated. I need to have a good grasp of state of the art. So you'll hear people, most of the people say that your actual research starts after you complete your doctorate. So my last point there is exactly that you need to be really acquainted with the state of art in the research domain, in your research domain, in you know after you complete your doctorate, when you're ready to supervise. Uh, there could be cases where you may change your research domain as well from your doctoral study to when you move towards supervision. That requires much more effort because now your not only your state of art has changed, your domain has also changed. So in those cases, usually I've seen that uh, supervisors take about 2-3 years to start guiding so that they themselves are aware of the state of the art in the new research domain, and then they can start to guide. So these things will depend on case to case basis, but the fact remains that all supervisors need to have a good grasp of state of the art. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to generate quality outputs from that research project. So, who is the ideal supervisor? This is on a very light note. We need to understand a supervisor's human skills, also inadequacies are very important. Like after all, we're all humans, so we have inadequacies as well. So who would you want to have as an ideal supervisor? So this is something I picked from the reference which is pasted at the bottom, and you'll see that if you could get a human being with these attributes as your supervisor, then that would be the best. Of course, we know in engineering terms, ideal does not exist, but you would love to have a supervisor of that this kind, who's as inspiring as Picasso, Einstein, Beatles. You know, there's so many just words out there which you would love the supervisor to have, but that's not possible. You can't have a supervisor like that. So, but you will have some aspects from a supervisor. Okay. Also, it's not possible for any supervisor to become this. We have our own characteristics. I will touch upon different characteristics and caricatures of supervisors in probably the next slide or the slide after that. So we would be able to relate to our supervisor if you have completed your doctorate, or if you're a student, you could relate it with your supervisor. But there is nothing like an ideal supervisor. So we need to understand this supervisor's skill as well as the inadequacies. In my personal experience, what has helped me is understanding my own inadequacy more so that I can help my doctoral students more. So I always focus a lot on what I am missing so that the student working with me is not missing the same. So possibly that can help everyone. So these are some of the characteristics. Of course, again, we can't have all these characteristics, but these are some of the key characteristics which I've picked up from this uh, article cited below. It's a very, very nice article, a long article, but very nice article which talks about what are the key characteristics of supervisor. So I'm just presenting, a summary of that. Availability is very, very important. You'll find that there are supervisors who are always busy with various things, and availability becomes a big problem. There are supervisors where to meet them, you need to contact their PA. You need to go through somebody to meet them. It's very challenging for students in that scenario. Uh, there are there are supervisors who would not be in their office for long periods of time because they are into conferences, or there's some board of directors and so on and so forth. So it's very challenging for students in that kind of scenario. There are also supervisors who are always available. That again, in my experience, is not that good because it leads to a lot of dependence. The student really becomes a kid, and he or she comes in for you for even one line of code. So there's a line you need to draw as a supervisor on how much you are available and when you are available. So, and that in my experience, that comes with experience. So, and every student will be different. I'll come to the characteristics of the students as well. You may find some student who will never be available himself or herself for different reasons. So I will touch upon that. Then you will find some student who's always available for different reasons. So we'll touch upon that later. A supervisor definitely needs to have self-direction. Uh, we need to, if you are aiming to be a supervisor or you are a supervisor, then we really need to have know especially what we are trying to do in the next 3 to 5 years, or where the research is heading in the next 3 to 5 years. If you're not aware of that, then it becomes very, very difficult. Then you will just be generating output which is random. And the disadvantage in doing that is that you will not be able to build a good community or group for yourself, and therefore collaborations become very limited. You will not be much known in the research community, and you will just be generating output which has no direction, which is not targeted. So it's very important to be self-directed, and this is exactly related to the point in the previous slide, that we need to be acquainted with the state of the art. So once you have the state of the art, you will definitely have the direction. So the next point after self-direction says questioning. So you're coming up with a lot of questions. So student who comes to you initially, one or two, whoever come to you, are really looking for what are the targets for them, or what are the domains for them. Of course, they will find their own research questions. You will help them, but at least you should have a broader picture of what state of the art is and what are the questions that need to be answered in that sense. Uh, Another important point which I have experienced personally is celebration. Initially, for both supervisor as well as the student, the new ones, celebrating small victories, I would say, publishing small codes, giving output. It's important. It helps you motivate. Uh, you know, so I won't say go for a big celebration, but at least some kind of celebration to motivate your team. It helps the supervisor as well. Something which is a mandate for all supervisors is building this network. Okay, without the network, it really doesn't work. If you localize your network, if you're only around in and around your own place, it really doesn't help because you're not really learning a lot because everybody around you have the same, same targets. So it is always good to look ahead, join, communities, and go for these seminars or good conferences outside, you know, and develop a lot of community, networking. It helps you as a supervisor as well as the student. You get to learn more. But by localizing or being within your own group or set of people, you're really not learning. You'll only be generating output within yourselves. That really doesn't help. You may be able to generate output and publish, but you will not be very well known. To be very well known, you need to connect, you need to collaborate a lot, and this involves a lot of learning. You could, be 10, 20 years of research experience, but you could end up collaborating with somebody who teaches you a lot of new things. So we have an open mind, and it's very important to do this. So you will see that many successful uh, supervisors or researchers in general have a very strong networking aspect which they do. Next is inspiring criticism and skill development. Of course, this criticism here has to be positive criticism, or it should be constructive criticism. It should not be criticism just for the sake of it. uh, I have experienced in some cases, you had a research committee where individuals would criticize probably just for the sake of it, but will not really help the student or the project progress. So as a supervisor, we need to filter that out so that the student is very clear what criticisms and to be taken constructively. Also, meaningful criticism is very important. So, the supervisor needs to really understand that from different places and help the student in that. You need to inspire, and I think the best way of inspiring, motivating your own student is to research continuously yourself, because here in research it's only the work that talks. You cannot be talking research. You need to generate output, you need to show, you need to progress, your CV needs to build. And once you do that, you're definitely inspiring everybody, but especially your students who you're doing. So the student who comes to you initially is really looking at your CV, your research CV. He's looking at your publications. He's looking at whatever other activities you're doing. You know, what's your collaboration, and he or she is deciding whether really he or she is up to it or not. So if you're not, if as a supervisor we are not doing all of that, then the student also thinks it's okay. I can join. Just go about it, maneuver a little bit, and get my output. So as a supervisor, I need to really draw the line on what kind of expectations I have from this student and the project. So I'll come to the quality part as we move ahead. Skill development again is very important. Now here, mostly what I've seen is we always think only about technical skill development. Please understand that we are going to generate output of the research. This needs to be documented in different forms, and the documentation needs to be done in the form of using English. You need to have skills to do that as well. As simple skills as using latex, for example, referencing, equations. These are some basic skills which are required. Coding over different platforms. I'm just talking in terms of engineering. There could be other skills which you require for other research, but I'm just focusing on this domain. So just don't focus on the technical skill development. There are other skill developments. There are some students you would find who struggle with concentration. They get distracted very quickly. So as a supervisor, I need to ensure that that kind of development also happens. So there are different skills. It depends from case to case. So for a new supervisor, be aware that these are also some of the skills. So we can't just have a student and she just does the technical work, and there are many such issues which come about. Overall, you're looking for a mentor for life. So there are different skills required here to be mentor. I'll be talking about this mentor as well. You're looking for a mentor. You're not looking at, the student is not looking to work for the supervisor for life. Let's understand the difference. He is going to be a mentor for life, but the student is not bound to work for him for the entire life. So don't let's not take the student as somebody who's going to just keep generating output for me for the entire life. No, at the end of the day, the student from your group or the research needs to become independent and start his own journey. That's the whole idea of mentoring and supervising. That's according to me. So I'm sharing here my personal experience. So at the same time, there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for research and also sensitivity. This has different meanings in different cases. How sensitive you are, it changes with you have a male student, female student, unmarried, married. So many cases are there in terms of sensitivity. So we deal with each of them separately. You always need to have enthusiasm for the research. If you're dull, then it just rubs across to the student as well. So there will be times when you are not enthusiastic. Uh, Definitely that happens with everybody. So I what I do in those cases, I stay away from the students and then come back when the enthusiasm comes back, because these are some things that rub upon the students. So this we learn as we experience. So I would suggest that you could read this article from Nature. It really gives you a lot of important things, especially for those who will begin this supervisor journey very soon. Next is I just put it out for a light-hearted read. Caricatures of supervisors. So these are some of the caricatures. Could have a supervisor who's a big talker, talks a lot, but really doesn't understand what you are doing, as in what the student is doing. So I don't know if we want to become a supervisor like that. There are supervisors who are slave drivers. You need to get they will expect you to do lots and lots work just beyond your capability and just get things done. There are some demigods there. Yeah, you will you'll never see them. So they have different prospects, better prospects that they're looking for. There are supervisors who will control you. They will know exactly what you're doing or what you're not doing. These are very challenging kind of supervisors who are controlling exactly what you're trying to do. A lot of science work involved will give you a lot of ideas. Uh, I would say in this case, it's very easy for the student to get confused because you'll have such so many ideas, and you're really not are getting directed towards what exactly you want. So in this case, if the supervisor is of the science work type, then the student is really looking at a targeted research. What exactly am I trying to do here? So uh, I don't know if you would like to have a science. Initial supervisors were laid back. Uh, really does not care about what output is not high quality. Next, I don't want to use the word, but the caricature says the psycho. But so they really come across very scary. You are really scared to make mistake if your supervisor is of that type. But in my experience, research is about making mistake and then learning from them, so you can do better. But people have different ideas about the same. So you could have somebody who really scares you for the smallest mistake that you do. The next one is somebody whom we should not really appreciate because he just has his own small group. He's very happy there. It's like a lion in the den kind of a scenario, and it just doesn't move out. It just keeps you in the group. He just says, okay, whatever you're doing is the best, because in this group that is the best. So there's no ambition to move out. There's no ambition to collaborate. There's no ambition to do better than what they have done. So that's something that really is a negative for the student in this case, because the student also comes out with the same characteristics. The next is a rising star. You get into there with him or her, and you're thinking, okay, you're going to learn so much and everything, but you find out very soon that there's not much room for you because the star is taking all the highlights. These are some of the caricatures I found. There are different ones as well. There are many more. We've had our own guides, and we always talk really well about our own guides. But they all have different characteristics. So uh, I think, in my experience, we should be very considerate about which guide or which supervisor or which mentor we are trying to become for the students. So this was on a light note. Uh, in general, what is the role of the supervisor at the beginning? If we are trying to be a fresh supervisor, let's say just finished doctorate, got my degree, and I'm now in a position. I've written a project, I've got that sanctioned, and I'm now ready to get a doctoral student working with me. So for that scenario, it's mandatory to have a good question because you just recently finished your doctorate, and at the end of your doctoral thesis we all write scope for research. So you are mostly picking up one of those questions, and you are progressing. You want to build your CV, you want to have good outputs. So you should have a good question. You mostly also have a good idea about the solution to this question because it is followed up from your own PhD thesis work. So it's very important to have this good question. It really helps you as well as the student who has joined you, he or she will get a good direction. So that's what the second point says, knowing exactly what has been done. This will already be available in your doctoral thesis. So you already know what has been done. You've done your survey. Uh, you know the state of the art. You have done the latest chapter in your thesis, and you have a good scope. So second point also gets in. You have a clear idea of which problem is going to be very hard and which is too easy to solve, because you have done both in your thesis. You probably had an easy problem you have solved and, let's say, published a good conference article. Then you have solved a really hard problem in your thesis and you've gone for a really good journal article, you know, just as an example. So you know already this. So in my experience, the fresh supervisor who's trying to be a guide does not really need to anticipate this. You rather already have this with you. But as you become a supervisor, 5, 10 years down the line, it's always good to anticipate which problem will be hard, which will be which will be easy to solve. At the middle, in the let's say it's a 5 year project, so somewhere around that second or the third year, uh, you're looking at a bigger picture. You're looking at what has been done in the previous couple of years, and picture. The student here is now looking at how am I going to submit my thesis. So you are the one as a supervisor who has to look at the bigger picture, like what are the outputs which are required. Here, I would also suggest that you may start looking at what can be done for the next student who joins you after this current student. So that's what you mean by a bigger picture. If you have, let's say, considered having, let's say, output as, for an example, 4 journal articles, the work has been done really good. Can I go in for an additional one? Okay, the work has not been that good. Can I chop it down to one place? So you need to have the bigger picture, because the student is not going to do it. He or she is just involved in his own, I want to complete my thesis, and you can't blame the student for that. Even we have done it when we were students. So you need to have the bigger picture somewhere around the second, third, or fourth year of the student's journey. Here you need to give good direction to the student. There could be possibly cases where nothing has come out as a good result in the couple of years. So the student is starting to think, okay, what's happening? So you need to give good directions here to the student. uh, we also need to have a good direction ourselves. So it really helps if you have the direction with us. Identify some common issues, pitfalls that you could have, because the student, of course, will not be in a position to do that. So it helps if you have a good group. You have your own supervisor or mentor. You have good advisors. If you have collaborators working with you, then they will help you identify this and also help you solve some issues that could be there. So it's always good to have a collaborative kind of work. You always get to learn as well. And in doing all of this, have an eye on the clock, because your project is funded 4 years, 5 years, or even if it's not funded, you have this timeline. The universities give you a timeline. A doctorate has to be done in 4 years or so. So keep a watch on the clock, the timeline. The student definitely has his eye there, but you need to do it with the idea of having a good quality output. Towards the end, yeah, this is important. This is something we need to know when the student should stop, because as a fresh supervisor, you're just involved in getting the output, and you're just okay. Your research is flowing and collaboration is going and everything, but you need to think about the student and really tell the student like when to stop. So it's always a good idea to have a framework or skeleton of this PhD thesis for the student. So I personally did it for the first 3 students I had. So I made a framework of the thesis, so I knew when to start and when to end. So it really helped the student in knowing, okay, these are the aspects that I need to do. and this is where I'm going to stop. So he or she also knew kind of the timeline he has, for conducting this project. So it's always good to tell the student when he or she is supposed to stop. The second point is something which I already mentioned: know what the thesis or the project looks like. So it's always good to have a framework or a skeleton for that. Then, of course, you need to have your viva. So you anticipate any kind of problem areas. You'll be able to do this as a supervisor. You'll be able to do this only when you are a continued researcher. So I've seen many supervisors who leave it all up to the student, but they themselves don't get involved too much, and so it's very difficult to identify any areas where issues are there. So it becomes a problem then for the student, especially during the viva, but it also becomes a problem for the student while generating the results. So it's always advisable for us as supervisors to be really involved. I like to call them as continued researchers. You're reading every day, you're writing every day, spending about 1 or couple of hours for writing and reading. These are the most important aspects for research: reading and writing. So always dedicate your time for reading and also writing. So again, my personal experience: writing is best during morning hours or really late night hours, but different people have their own way of doing it. I'm sure all the continued researchers will agree you need to read and write every day. So once you're doing that, you'll be able to anticipate the problem areas for the student. Supervisory styles, again, this is out there online. So how do you select everybody for the exam? You're asking all students to just take the same exam. So what you're trying to do is either you are micromanaging or you're just throwing them out, sink. But there needs to be a middle ground where there's room for creativity. There's also independence. I strongly believe in making the student independent as the years progress, rather than making them dependent on you. So if your student at the end, you know, 4 years, 5 years is dependent on you, then I don't think we've done a good job. They should become independent, because then they will be able to, supervise independently. Initially, they will need your handholding, but then slowly they'll be independent. So this independence is required. So at the induction, what is the role of the supervisor? So what I mean by the induction is when you have these interviews for the students, and you're selecting those students. So we have these tests and interviews. Most of the universities have that. So we are looking at their grade cards, we are interacting with them, we're looking at their academic background. So it's a very good time for a supervisor, a fresh supervisor, to really identify what kind of training this particular student has, requires. The student may be very good intellectually, mathematically, coding wise, and everything else, but he may not be really, proficient with English, for example. So it's very good to identify that, okay, requirement, this is the requirement for this student. You could have a student with really good skills, but one of the skills which he's missing is probably report writing. So, okay, I need to train him in, let's say, for example, latex. So if you identify this kind of training for the student at the beginning, at the induction, then it really helps, you know, to for the student to progress and for your project also to progress. So this should be taken care, in my experience, during the induction. Any subject specific knowledge and skills which are required, this needs to come from the supervisor. Of course, the students take their own, you know, coursework and other things. So many universities give you the choice to the supervisor and the student to pick and choose their own subjects which the students need to take. So here, be very clear what kind of subjects the students need to take. I mean, an introduction to ABC course may not really help your doctoral student. It could be something like advanced course on ABC. You know, we have so many online certifications and other coding methods and things like that which are available. Ensure that your student and also yourself have this clear idea of good academic practice. We spoke about this in the last session, ethics and governance and all those ideas which are followed by the university norms. Uh, Ensure that you are aware of all the milestones which are required, from here to next 6 months coursework, and from there to 6 months registration, so on. So, I mean, different universities have their own norms. So make sure that all parties which are involved are aware of that. Here, in my experience, it is very important for an initial supervisor to make very clear to the student the expectation in terms of output. If you're talking about output in terms of journals, be very clear what is expected. It should not be okay, anything is fine. You need to be very, very, very clear what is the expectation. So, okay, I'm expecting, ABC publication in this year, or these many in this year. So it needs to be very, very clear. So the student really can work in this. If you're not very clear, then it becomes very difficult for the student. He just keeps reading, he just keeps generating results, but it doesn't know exactly what he's doing. So that really leads to a lot of demotivation as the years progress. So make sure that everybody is aware of everything that is required. So a lot of work goes in from the supervisor's end initially, before the student starts the work. So in the middle of this entire progress, always good to have regular meetings. As I said, one of the caricatures mentioned that is never available. Let's not be that supervisor. Always have regular meetings. It's always okay to just buzz the student and say, what's going on. The student will always respond. There are students who get stuck, and they are stuck for a long period. They will never come back and meet you. It's not good to do that. Always try to have the student ask the student, what's going on. The student will always respond. Uh, there are some universities which need to have meetings as per their policy as well. You need to have research committee in 6 months, 3 months. So make sure that you're following the same. Being accessible, that's what I was saying. Be accessible to the student when he or she needs advice. Nowadays we can be connected and communicated with different platforms, so it's always good. Let the student be as free as possible with you in terms of asking for advice. So there's a fine line between how accessible you are and how accessible you are not. But make sure that the research is progressing. So here, this is completely dependent on the two people, that is the supervisor and the student, and they will definitely have different characteristics, personalities. So it's all about bridging the gap between those characteristics and the personalities. So continuous guidance on what standard is expected, what kind of research we are looking at, anything new which has come about, because it is expected for the supervisor also to be a continued researcher. So make sure that this guidance also goes to the student. Of course, I've already mentioned about the standard expected. This is something which I have found in my personal experience, to make it very clear to the student what is expected as a standard, because the student should not have a double thought on this standard. So if a supervisor's standard is mediocre, it will be the same with the student. If it is of higher standard, then it will always be higher. Let's be very clear. A supervisor's mediocre standard and a student's higher standard will not match. It's not possible, because we'll not be able to guide the student to that standard. So if you are really looking for high quality, then we as a supervisor also need to have that high quality. And I'm talking about quality in all sense, not just in terms of publication, right? In all senses. So make sure that that standard is very clear to everybody. Uh, Already I have mentioned about constructive criticism. Here, I have seen it in my experience. A lot of criticism comes in, especially in meetings and other things, and it can really put down the student, especially in the initial stage, because he or she is still trying to figure out his research and other aspects. So, as a supervisor, it is really important to filter out from all those criticisms the ones which are constructive, which will help him, the student, to build more towards the research. So you need to tell the student, okay, this is what is really good, and this is something which is not that applicable. So make sure that you are doing that with the student. And arrange for students to have talks. I have found this a very good uh, tool. With my students, I have at least now, every couple of weeks, small presentations. And now with the online platform like how we are having, you can always sit anytime and always discuss your research. So I always give the students this time and this day for them to talk about their research, whatever progress they have done, whatever progress. So I'm not meeting them, after a month or couple of months, because it becomes very new for everybody, the research. But every couple of weeks or so, and it's always good. Always motivate your students to attend these seminars, good conferences. Again, I'm not sure about local conferences, but really good, high quality conferences where they can meet a lot of people and also present their work. That's the job of the conference. And of course, they are publishing in different avenues. So it's always good to have your student go and talk about his or her research. Uh, Universities code for research, I've already mentioned. Everyone involved must be aware of that. This will depend on university to university, institute to institute. So make sure you're following that. The training which you provide to the student must be, within whatever ethics are required. Make sure all of that is done. I think not a lot of it is involved in the engineering domain, but proper training is required for the student. Uh, Make sure the student is aware of all the sources which are available for him. For example, especially the library sources, because the student would be mostly involved in his research and may not be really aware of all these sources, the tools which are available. If you have in your university any career guidance, any health and safety aspects, all of that, make sure that your student is aware of this. So always send them these links or these nudges to make sure that they are aware of these sources which are present in the university. Let's now focus on the role of the student. Even though it is mentioned the role of the student, it is still the role of the supervisor, because here we are talking about supervisor at an initial stage. So this is how the student would basically behave. But as a new supervisor, we need to be really aware of this. A student is really expected to make a regular contact with the supervisor. If it is not happening, then as a supervisor, always go ahead and say, what's happening. Because the student really needs to discuss with you, all the comments or all the issues that are going on. So if the student is lost for a long time, he has not met you, then something's not right. Always give a nudge and say, what's going on. Let's meet. Uh, take the student actually needs to initiate raising any problems or difficulties. You may find some students who may not be doing that. So make sure that the student is always in a position to do that. Just making sure that I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Uh, so the student is always expected to raise the problems or whatever issues he has. So make sure that as a supervisor, if that's not happening, then that is raising some alarms. So make sure that that's happening by the student. The student is expected to take the initiative to learn, a lot of new skills, become competent. If that's not happening in your thoughts, then always ask the student what's going on. The students will always respond. It's only about asking them, what's going on. So if they're not really involved in taking these steps to improve themselves, uh, you know, not becoming competent enough, then always, ask them and tell them that they are supposed to do that. Usually initial students do not write the projects, so they will not be really aware of the schedule. So here this last point is mostly applicable for the supervisors, the initial supervisors. We need to be really aware of the schedule of the research project and what are the expectations in terms of the output, and always also from any committees which are involved here. So you can't expect really the student to know this, but as a supervisor I should be aware. If you're funding the student through a funded project, then you already know the timeline. You have 24 months, 36 months, and so on and so forth. So make sure that the student is aware of that. Student is supposed to maintain the progress of his work. If that maintaining of the progress is not happening, then as a supervisor, make sure that it is being done. Otherwise, it becomes very chaotic at the end of the research. Usually, while compiling the thesis, it becomes very difficult. You're not sure how and where you have progressed, in which, let's say, from a thesis example, in which chapter, what was the progress. So you will not be able to relate that chapter with the subsequent chapter, and so on and so forth. So it becomes very difficult. It only delays the process. So make sure that a proper progress, documentation is maintained at all times if the student is not doing that. Again, student will not be in a position to decide when to submit the thesis, but the supervisor should. So it is always good to have this timeline at the start of the research, where okay, once this is completed, then we are in a position to write the thesis and then submit the thesis, and you know the norms of the universities have been met in terms of the output, the timeline, and so on and so forth. So student definitely is completely responsible for his own development, both personal and professional. So if that is something that is not happening, as a supervisor, you must look at it. Is definitely the professional development, because that is required for the research project which he is working for. Again, this is something which I have already mentioned. He or she should be aware of the regulations and policies of the institution. If he has any issue, any queries during any part of the doctoral study, then always be in a position to answer that, or at least get it clarified from the university or the institute. So towards the end, what is the role of the supervisor? This becomes very important, especially when you are a fresh supervisor, the first time supervisor. Nominating appropriate examiners. This is very important, and this comes only when you have good collaborations, good connects, good networking. You are able to the people are really aware of the the research which you have conducted. You'll get high quality examiners, good examiners for the thesis of your student. If you have, you're a continued researcher in that area, people are aware of your work. So this is nominating those examiners is very important. I have seen in my experience some examiners with conflict of interest, some not that very high quality. So the different examples, I don't want to mention it, but overall what that does to the student is the student's thesis and career is at stake. So make sure there is no, we should make sure that there is no like ifs and buts in terms of those examiners. So always have the examiners. Follow the rule of the university for nominating the examiner. Mostly universities have external and internal examiners, and they also have norms for appointing them. Different norms like NIRF, QS ranking, and their cadre, and so on and so forth. So make sure that you are aware of that. So again, I share my experience. Once the student is in the process of compiling the thesis, the first draft, I contact the examiners and make sure that they are available, so that once the thesis and everything is compiled and it's ready to be submitted to the university, I already have the examiners ready with me, so that once the thesis goes into the university, there's no delay in sending the thesis to the examiner. So this is the way I do it. I'm sharing my experience. I mean, different supervisors have their own experience, but have their own way. But the overall idea is that there should not be any delay in sending the students' thesis to the examiners, because subsequently the examiners require their own time and then submit, and mostly you get revisions in the thesis and so on and so forth. So it's a timeline that we need to follow. So best is not to have any delays. Uh, Next is once you get comments back, the student mostly at this stage is in a position to answer most of the comments, but there could be some comments which he may not be in a position to answer. So supervisor needs to help him out, assist the student for any viva questions that he may get. Mostly these days, I see that the examiners present their own viva questions, so that really helps. But you never know what could be asked in the defense. So it's always good, especially for your first or second student, to help them out with what could be the viva questions. Uh, and then just handhold the student throughout the entire process of resubmitting the thesis and so on. So this is the job towards the end of uh, the, the doctoral work that a supervisor needs to do. So how do you manage the supervision? This is again completely my experience. Discuss and agree on the key issues. The most key issue that we find is what is the quality that is required? What is the standard? The authorship is more or less decided, but what is the standard? That I think that is very, very important. Student always wants to complete. We can't blame him or her for that. We have also done that, but it's always the supervisor who decides the standard and make sure that you're getting that standard. So make sure that everybody is aware of that. It's always good to be proactive and arrange for meetings. I do that with my students. As time progresses, the students themselves learn and then they arrange for meetings themselves. But initially, I do that. So I make sure that I'm proactive in that sense, and the students get, the more meetings, the more it helps them to present their work. Always have an agenda for the meeting. Just let's not have a meeting for just over a cup of tea and we're not really discussing the research. So you can always have a cup of tea, but also discuss the progress of the research. So always have some work before the meeting, and this you can get from the student. Like if he or she has done some kind of reading, some draft is ready, some data is ready, and as you move on, 5-6 months down the line, the student will be in a position to do this for you. So initially show them the way, and then these meetings and agenda and work, this can be done by the student. It becomes a habit. So it's always good to keep meeting with these students. For the student, what is required? Expect to receive feedback and criticism. As we move along, I have seen that students get this knack of filtering constructive and destructive criticism themselves, but initially we need to help them out. Student needs to deal with any problems as they arise. This could be technical or resource wise or any supervision kind of issues. Students must be used to it, but as a supervisor, we should ensure that this is happening as less as possible. They're not really dealing with any problems, especially in terms of resource. I think we should give them as much resource as possible. Summarize the meeting and keep a copy. The student should do it. So these days you can always have it as a digital copy for really good summary and referring to it, and what is it that is required for the next meeting and so on. So here I'll share my experience. I have these meetings couple of weeks with the students, and it really helps. And at the end of the month, we have presentations. So it helps the students to remain active, and it also helps me as a supervisor to remain active and to know exactly what they are doing. So in all of this, what is required is a lot of respect mutually. You're talking about a teacher-student relationship, but with a lot of respect. Clear understanding of the expectations. If it is not clear, I have seen it, experienced it. If expectations are not clear, then it leads to a lot of chaos, a lot of problems. So expectations have to be really, laid down, and everyone should be clear. It's a shared commitment, in my opinion. Uh, it's it's 100-0 initially, supervisor to student. It becomes slowly 50-50, so on, and at the end it becomes really mostly the student followed by the supervisor. So that's how we say that the student has become independent. So it's a shared commitment to whatever research we are trying to, the goal of the research that we are trying to do. Next is important. How do you prevent conflicts? Nobody is free of conflicts. There could be many conflicts which occur. Major ones which I have seen are mostly because of lack of communication. Uh, Mostly the or they don't say should be understood by the student. I disagree with that. Clear communication really helps. It helps to identify and understand the expectations right at the beginning. Uh, it helps you build your, whatever programs and agendas you have for whichever meetings you are trying to do. You can really identify if there would be any problems at any stage, and you can try to minimize those problems. The other issue, as I've been repeating, is mismatched expectation. You as a supervisor want to have really high expectation, but the student is not, or vice versa. Vice versa is not really the case mostly, but if that is a mismatch, then it becomes a problem. Also, knowing the student, knowing what he or she is capable of, and then having an unrealistic expectation, that also really delays the process. So it becomes very difficult if you have a mismatched expectation. So as a supervisor, it's very important to be very transparent and say that, okay, this is what is expected. If you join me, this is what is supposed to be done here. There have been cases of personality clash. You know, cultural differences come into the picture, discipline. Always try to have a middle ground. There are some non-negotiables, for example, research output and standard, but then there are some negotiables as well. So identify which can be done, and you can come at a middle ground. Personality clashes and things like this really doesn't help the research to move further. Competing pressures is also something which I have seen in few cases. Uh, you know, don't just overpromise, saying that I'm going to do this much. It's not. It puts a lot of unnecessary pressure. Uh, give give the student enough time, uh, you know, enough agenda to ensure that, okay, these kind of pressures are met, and whatever is promised, at least that much is done, and then you can always go ahead. So I personally always promise adequate, and then when we are able to meet that, then we go for the next stage. So ultimately, both parties involved, the supervisor and the student here, we are human beings. So have a respect on that sense, and go about your research. So there are chances when things don't work, when work is not progressing, uh, you're having a lot of personal difficulties. This could be for both supervisor as well as the student. Uh, Always ensure that there is a solution. The best solution in that case is to speak. If you're a supervisor, talk to the student. Student, talk to the supervisor. Uh, there's always a way to make sure that we are able to resolve some kind of issue. You always hope that this doesn't turn out at any point in a student's career or a supervisor's career. You definitely don't want this when you are a fresh supervisor or an initial supervisor. You definitely don't want this. So let it not go to the stage where you know you are coming to this stage where things have not progressed, and you're talking about how to resolve things like change of guide and those kind of things. It doesn't really help any of the parties. Of course, if still after all this it doesn't get resolved, you can always go to, if you have a head of the department, head of the research center, or head of the director, whoever it is. And I think the last resort is always you can always have a change of supervisor, but I definitely don't suggest that at any point to any student as well as for a supervisor. It doesn't help. So I always avoid this kind of a thing. So luckily for me, it has not happened, and I'm at least I make sure that the student is in a position that it does not happen. So if everything goes fine, you're as a as a supervisor, you're aware of state of the art. You have good, collaboration, good work ethic, good decent, good high standard expectations. The student is also doing good. You're giving them good directions. Then it will definitely not come to this point. So I personally believe that it's a commitment by the supervisor to the student that he or she will handhold him or her for the next 4 to 5 years. So it is responsibility from our end as a supervisor that the student does not look for any change of supervisor and so on and so forth. So always make sure that we are completing the entire process for the student. So overall, this is completely my experience. So we are responsible for the candidature of the student, the candidate, to and ensure that the research should be of very high standard. Uh, so we'll definitely be from the academic background. So we are aware of what is required from the research, what are the norms, what are the standards to be required. Uh, we'll be in a position to always discuss the nature of the research, uh, what topic to be chosen initially by the student. You can always tweak among these topics, but on a broader area, what topics to be chosen, what are the different milestones. It's very important to have these milestones. I personally do 6-month milestones, but I've seen some supervisors do yearly milestones. So if you're doing a project from a funding agency, you need yearly milestones, but always good to have these small milestones using a lot of library resources. Uh, Maintain a close contact with the student supervisor. Both it goes both ways. Uh, as a supervisor, we need to give good feedback, constructive feedback to the student, so that you are able to he or she is able to develop the solutions to the problems which they identify. Uh, I have seen supervisors. Personally, in my case, I've been lucky. They also provide career advice. Apart from the technical solutions, they also provide career advice and assistance. So if your relationship with the student is like that, you can also, as a supervisor, provide that to the student. So my experience, I make sure I always attend events. You will always see me in really high quality conferences. It really helps gain good network, very good collaborations. There are a lot of people available for good collaborations. It really helps my own research and in turn the research of my students. I try to attend as many workshops and also conduct many workshops and FDPs. There's a genuine effort that I put in to understand the state of art research. It really helps me build this network, in turn helping the students. So we're always doing this for enhancing the CV of our own as well as the students who are connected with us. If you are into the second or the third student or fourth and fifth student, it's always good to talk to the previous students, learn about their experience working with you, what were the challenges and what the opportunities were. So what I have found in my experience is my first and second students always told me what were their challenges with me when they were students. They opened up more with me after they graduated. So you always get that, where the challenges were and what can you do to ease it out for your current students. What were the opportunities that possibly your previous students missed out, and what could be done by the current students. So always good idea to talk to current and past students. Always be in touch with them, look at their progress and see how they are doing. Uh, uh, this works wonders with me and my group. we always present our work. Whenever we get an opportunity, we always go and present our work. We always get a lot of criticisms, then we filter out whichever is constructive. But we always go and present our work. So I'm a firm believer that this really helps you uh, improve your work as well as disseminate your work and build a lot of collaborations and contact. Always consider your research interests. Uh, so I would say my experience is I'm not much into extending my research. I'm more into state of art research. So I, I always fancy changing uh, the research question in the domain uh, or changing the domain itself. So uh, it always helps you, and then in turn your students if you really are very specific about your research interests. Something that the students have told me, so I'm just communicating here to everybody. uh, be a very clear communicator. This helps a lot. If you're not a clear communicator, it becomes very difficult for the student and everybody, even the staff in that research project, to really understand what's going on. Your dependability is basically, it depends on how you project yourself over a period of time. Considerate, this is very subjective, where you need to be considerate, where not. So this is something that each and every one of us would take a call on. Approachable, definitely. I don't have any PA or assistant who would give a time to my student. I'm always approachable, but different people have their own ways of doing it, because supervisors will be at different positions, at different admin positions, and so they have their own time constraint. But being approachable to the student is always helpful. They do more than what is required. That is my experience. And as a supervisor, we should be always open to learning. I have seen so many supervisors who only supervise, they are not open to learning. That does not really help, because you'll not be able to understand what the student has done. So it becomes very difficult to then tell them how they can improve. Something again, I think all of us should focus on is demand. Something we should not do. We should not exploit or harass or view the student as a ladder to improve your research CV. Don't do that. The student is doing his or her own research with you. At the end, the student needs to be independent and then do the same what we are doing. So there's no case of exploiting or harassing or asking a lot, unrealistic from the student. So there's a difference between setting the standard and asking a lot from the student. So make sure that that's not happening. I always like my students to become independent at the end, and I don't create any obligations with them. I have my students now, the ones who have graduated, don't work with me. They have their own domain. I have my own domain, so it's not necessary for them to generate output with me. I'm not obligating them to do that. I'm also not asking them to do the work with me for lifetime. That's not required. They're connected, but they don't have to do it. So they become independent. That's the progress of the student which you are looking at. At the end, I would say to all of us, it really helps to be a consistent, everyday researcher. So I think everybody who is a continuous and consistent researcher would agree that everyday reading and everyday writing are the most important aspects of research. So I think we should not compromise on that. Allocate a couple of hours for that, maybe in the morning, evening, night, whenever is the best for you, and make sure if that is happening. Then I think all of these would be met at all the time. So that's all from my end in this. I hope I have been able to give some insights into how to go about it when you are trying to be a supervisor, uh, especially initial supervisor. There is so much more experience that many experienced supervisors have, but this is some experience which I have had and I'm still experiencing in my journey as a supervisor. So I hope this will help everyone. Again, you can always feel free to contact me, connect with me over LinkedIn, ResearchGate, and these are some of my research aspects. I also